And welcome again to Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. Joining me, Juan Zarate. He's our national security analyst. Juan, as always, good to see you.
Always great to see you, Bob.
Let's talk about Ukraine. So now we have news that President Putin has floated a ceasefire peace idea.
Yeah, a 7-part plan.
Yeah.
Much of which requires the Ukrainian forces to back out and to not go after the Russian separatists. So it's not, in the Ukrainian point of view, not a credible peace plan. That said, what you have is a diplomatic kabuki dance underway, where the players are trying to jockey for position. You have the Ukrainians now offering a ceasefire with the separatists, and the Russians playing, in some ways, the role of peacemaker and spoiler at the same time. At the same time, you've got NATO meeting, sending some very strong signals toward Russia, but with a clear understanding that NATO is not going to engage directly in a military way to confront the Russians. And the question out there as to whether or not the U.S. and other Western European countries are going to provide arms or perhaps even training and logistic support to the Ukrainian forces. With all that up in the air, what you have is a bit of this diplomatic kabuki dance and a fight for presence and control of territory in the eastern part of Ukraine.
So President Obama goes to Estonia, makes a pretty tough speech. He's got his NATO partners with him. What does Putin think? Because it doesn't seem that it's going to be anything more than speech making right now.
Well, Putin, I think, has used all of these maneuvers to his advantage because what you see at every turn, whether it's NATO proclaiming its support to its neighbors that border Russia, like the Estonians, or the desire to support the Ukrainians, at least politically, what Putin has done is use that as a rallying cry. He has said, for example, if NATO intends to encroach further on Russian borders, then we are going to take more aggressive steps. And so what's interesting to me is not just what NATO is doing, but how Putin has been able to very carefully use those maneuvers to justify his positions and what Russia's doing.
So what's the possible play here by Putin to try to allow the separatists to try to reach some kind of agreement where the separatists hold on to what they have, and this gives Russia then that coastal highway that they look for?
Yeah, I think Russia has several things in mind. One, there's a lot of sort of logistics and supplies that they get from eastern Ukraine. It's been integrated from a military and economic perspective into the Russian economy, so that's important. They want a bridge to Crimea that doesn't mean going through Ukraine. They want to keep Ukraine from moving into NATO's orbit and toward the West. And so what you've seen Russia doing is to try to expand the control that these separatists have. That's why you've had Russian forces, either volunteers or otherwise, helping those forces, pushing back Ukrainian troops, and also then declaring not just a right for a federal system, but potentially even statehood or independence. And so the Russians are pushing the maximum position politically to try to give the separatists breathing room and to give them some breathing room.
But that doesn't seem to be tenable for Kiev and for the Ukraine government. I mean, it seems like they're not going to fold their tent and go home and just cede part of the country. They've already lost Crimea.
They're not, but the question is, can they fight back, not just with what's happening with the separatists, but with the support that the Russians are giving them, which according to NATO forces and Washington involves regular troops, direct involvement on the Ukrainian side of the border. And so the real question is, and I think this is Putin's calculus, can he change the facts on the ground so that Kiev has no choice in the matter? And I think that's the real dilemma for the West. If Russia is able to change the facts on the ground in a way that puts Kiev in a very weak position, what does the West do?
The president said you can't redraw boundaries at the point of a gun, but it seems like that's exactly what Putin's trying to do.
That's what Putin has done. Whether or not we consider it to be 21st century practices, Putin is demonstrating that the use of power and force in furtherance of national interests can work, at least in the short term.
And just real quickly, any chance at all that this could go beyond Ukraine, that this could become a bigger problem?
Well, I think part of this depends on Russia. Is this part of a broader strategy that Putin and Moscow have to expand their reach, not just sort of ideologically or politically, but also physically? They've done it in Georgia. They've done it with Crimea. They're doing it in eastern Ukraine. Do they have designs on Russian populations in places like the Baltics? And I think that's the real question. If Russia pushes the envelope too far, then you do have a real question, because the second that a NATO country is implicated, the collective self-defense principles apply, and the U.S. and its other NATO allies are committed to defend.
One we will watch for quite some time, I think, Juan.
We've got to keep watching. Russia's playing a long game.
All right, thank you. And thanks to you for watching Flashpoints. I'm Bob Orr. We'll see you next time.